In the autumn of 1999, a 5-year-old girl named Emma Rose Thornton disappeared from her home in Riverside, Connecticut, without leaving a single clue behind for anyone to find. She didn't vanish during a school day like you might expect from stranger danger warnings parents give their kids constantly. She left with neighbors, people her family had known for years, trusted completely on what was supposed to be a simple overnight camping trip to the state park that would end on Saturday afternoon with s'mores and stories. But Saturday came and went, and Emma never came home to her worried family. For 21 years, her parents waited by the phone, checking every lead that came through. Her brothers grew up with an empty seat at the breakfast table every single morning, and the small town of Riverside carried a mystery that nobody could solve no matter how many sleepless nights the police department spent trying. If you think you know how these stories end, you're about to discover something that will change everything you thought was possible. The town of Riverside sat along the Connecticut Riverbank in 1999, a place where maybe 8,000 people knew each other's names and histories. Fall evenings smelled like what smoke from chimneys and apple cider from the orchard on the edge of town. Children walked to school in groups, played in yards until their mothers called them in for dinner, and nobody worried much about the dangers that existed beyond their peaceful streets. Life felt safe and predictable in all the ways that mattered to families raising children here. The Thornton family lived in a brick colonial house on Maple Drive, right in the middle of town, where everyone could see their well-kept lawn and flower gardens. Richard Thornton worked as an accountant at a firm in Hartford, commuting an hour each way every single day. His wife, Margaret, taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary School, where all 4 of their children had attended over the years. Their youngest was Emma, a tiny 5-year-old with dark brown hair that fell in waves to her shoulders and hazel eyes that changed color depending on what she wore. She was shy, the kind of child who hid behind her mother's legs when strangers spoke to her. She loved drawing pictures of animals and flowers, spending hours with crayons and paper spread across the kitchen table. She carried a small stuffed bear everywhere she went, a brown fuzzy thing with button eyes that she'd named Coco after her favorite drink before bedtime. The Thornton children were tight-knit, protective of each other in ways that made their parents proud. Daniel was 14, the responsible oldest brother who helped Emma with her shoes every morning. Christopher was 11, always making Emma laugh with silly jokes and magic tricks he learned from library books. Benjamin was 8, Emma's closest companion, who built blanket forts with her and let her be the princess in every imaginary game they played together. To anyone who knew them, the Thorntons seemed like the perfect American family. Hard-working, devoted, the kind of people who volunteered at church fundraisers and never missed a school event. That autumn had been particularly beautiful, with leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold across the hillsides. The children spent their afternoons jumping in leaf piles and drinking hot chocolate on the back porch. Emma loved collecting the prettiest leaves, pressing them between the pages of her picture books to save forever. On weekends, the whole family would drive to the state park for hikes along the trails, where Richard would point out different types of trees and Margaret would pack sandwiches for picnics by the river. Life felt orderly and safe in all the best ways anyone could imagine. The Morrison family had been friends with the Thorntons for about 5 years by that point. Paul Morrison worked in the same building as Richard, though for a different accounting firm on a higher floor. His wife, Linda, volunteered at the elementary school library, where Margaret often saw her shelving books and helping students find stories for book reports. They lived just 4 blocks away in a Victorian house painted pale yellow with white trim that everyone in town admired. They didn't have children of their own, which some neighbors found curious, but most people didn't question at all. Some couples chose different paths, focused on careers or travel instead of raising kids. Nobody made assumptions or asked intrusive questions about their choices. Linda had a warmth about her that drew children naturally to her side. She'd organize story time at the library, doing different voices for characters that made the kids giggle with delight. At neighborhood block parties, she'd set up craft tables with supplies for the children to make friendship bracelets and painted rocks. Margaret trusted her implicitly, had even asked Linda to watch the children a few times when she and Richard needed to attend evening events for work. Nothing about the Morrison couple seemed unusual or raised any red flags with anyone watching. They were simply good neighbors who showed up when called and brought casseroles when families needed help. It was on a Wednesday afternoon in late October when Linda knocked on the Thorntons' front door. She stood there smiling, holding a plate of pumpkin cookies still warm from her oven. Margaret opened the door with a welcoming expression, inviting Linda inside for coffee, like she always did when Linda stopped by to visit. They sat in the living room while Emma played with her dolls on the carpet nearby, humming softly to herself. "Paul and I are planning a camping trip to Forest Lake State Park this weekend," Linda said conversationally, taking a sip of her coffee. "Just Friday night and Saturday, getting away to enjoy the fall colors before winter comes too soon." She set down her cup, then looked at Margaret with a thoughtful smile. "We were wondering if Emma might like to come with us for the overnight trip. We'd take excellent care of her, let her roast marshmallows, tell stories by the campfire, all the fun camping experiences children should have." Margaret hesitated, surprised by the invitation being extended so casually. "Oh, I'm not sure," she said, glancing at Emma, who was still absorbed in her play. "She's never been away from home overnight, except with family members. She might get homesick or scared sleeping in a tent." Linda nodded with understanding, the way she always did with parents' concerns. "I completely understand your hesitation, truly. But it would just be one night, and we have plenty of camping experience. We'd set up right near the bathrooms and ranger station, very safe and supervised. And it might be good for Emma to have a little adventure, build her confidence." Margaret thought about it for several minutes, weighing the offer carefully in her mind. The older boys were going to a hockey tournament in Boston with Richard for the weekend, already planned and paid for months ago. She'd been planning to use the quiet time to grade papers and prepare lesson plans for the upcoming week at school. And Linda had watched the children before without any issues arising ever. "Let me talk to Richard tonight," Margaret finally said, not committing either way yet. "I'll call you tomorrow with an answer." Linda smiled, finished her coffee, and left the cookies on the coffee table before heading out the door. That evening, Margaret brought it up to Richard while they prepared dinner together in the kitchen. He was tired from his commute, but he listened as she explained the camping invitation from the Morrisons. "I don't see any problem with it," he said after thinking it over carefully. "Linda's great with kids, and Paul seems responsible. It's a state park with rangers and other campers around, not the wilderness. Emma might really enjoy it, and it could help her be less timid around new experiences." Margaret still felt a small knot of uncertainty in her stomach, that quiet maternal instinct whispering that something felt off. But she pushed it away, told herself she was being overprotective and unnecessarily anxious. "Okay," she said finally, drying her hands on a dish towel. "I'll call Linda tomorrow and say yes." The next morning, Margaret called Linda and confirmed that Emma could join them for the camping trip. Linda sounded delighted, promised to pack everything Emma would need, including a sleeping bag, flashlight, and extra warm clothes for the cool October nights. "We'll leave Friday after Paul gets home from work, probably around 5 o'clock, Linda said cheerfully. "And we'll have her back by Saturday afternoon, maybe 3 or 4, depending on traffic and how quickly we pack up camp in the morning." Margaret thanked her, hung up the phone, and tried to shake the uneasy feeling that wouldn't quite go away completely. On Friday afternoon, Margaret dressed Emma in purple corduroy pants and a warm sweater with flowers embroidered on the front. She packed a small backpack with Emma's pajamas, toothbrush, a change of clothes, and Coco the stuffed bear that Emma refused to sleep without ever. Emma clutched Coco tightly, excited, but also nervous about her first camping trip away from home. "You be good for Mr. Paul and Mrs. Linda," Margaret said, kneeling down to look Emma in the eyes while holding her small shoulders firmly. "Listen to what they tell you, and if you get scared or want to come home, You asked them to call me right away. Yes, Mommy, Emma said in her soft voice that always made Margaret's heart squeeze with love. Margaret kissed her forehead, smoothed her dark hair, and walked her out to the driveway, where Paul and Linda pulled up in their green SUV right on time. Linda got out, opened the back door, and helped Emma climb into the booster seat they borrowed from a friend who had kids. She buckled Emma in carefully, making sure the straps were secure and comfortable. We'll call you when we get to the campsite, Linda said through the open window to Margaret standing there watching. And we'll see you tomorrow afternoon with lots of stories about our adventure. Margaret waved as the SUV backed out of the driveway and rolled down Maple Drive toward the main road. Emma waved from the back window, her little hand pressed against the glass, smiling with excitement. Margaret stood there watching until the vehicle turned the corner and disappeared from her view completely. She went back inside, telling herself everything would be fine, that Emma would have a wonderful time and come home tomorrow with memories of her first camping trip. But deep down, that knot in her stomach tightened and wouldn't let go at all. Saturday morning arrived with no phone call from Linda like she'd promised to make. Margaret tried not to worry too much, told herself maybe the cell phone reception at the campsite was poor or non-existent. Saturday afternoon came, 3 o'clock passed, then 4 o'clock, and still no sign of the Morrisons' SUV pulling into the driveway with Emma. By 5 o'clock, Margaret was pacing the kitchen floor, checking the window every few minutes for headlights. At 6, she called the Morrison house, but the phone just rang and rang with no answer on the other end. By 7, Richard was home from a hockey tournament with the boys, and Margaret was in full panic mode. Something's wrong, she said to Richard, her voice shaking with fear. They should have been back hours ago. Linda promised to call, and she hasn't. Something's happened, I know it. Richard tried to stay calm, though his own worry was building rapidly. He called Paul's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail every time. He called the State Park Ranger Station, asked if they had any record of Paul and Linda Morrison camping there that weekend. The ranger checked the registration log, came back on the line with concerning news. Sir, we don't have anyone by that name registered for camping this weekend or last weekend either. Are you sure they said Forest Lake State Park? Richard felt his blood run cold. Yes, that's what they told us. Are you certain there's no record of them? I'm looking at our complete registration system right now, the ranger confirmed. No Morrison registered at all this month. Richard thanked him, hung up, and looked at Margaret with fear in his eyes now. They were never at the state park. They lied to us. By 8 o'clock that night, Margaret and Richard were at the Riverside Police Station filing a missing child report. Sergeant David Walsh, a veteran officer with 18 years on the force, took their statement personally. He arrived at the station within minutes of the call, understanding the urgency of a missing child case immediately. Tell me everything from the beginning, Walsh said, pulling out his notepad. Don't leave out any details, no matter how small or insignificant they seem. Margaret walked him through the entire story, from Linda's visit with the camping invitation to the departure on Friday evening, to the missing phone call, to the fact that they were now 5 hours late with no contact whatsoever. Richard added details about Paul, their work connection, the fact that the Morrisons had seemed completely normal and trustworthy. Sergeant Walsh wrote everything down carefully, asked for descriptions of Paul and Linda Morrison and their vehicle. We'll check their house first, Walsh said, standing up. See if maybe they came back and forgot to call you in the chaos of unpacking. But when officers arrived at the yellow Victorian house 4 blocks away, the house was completely dark inside. They knocked on the door repeatedly, rang the doorbell, walked around to check the back entrance. Nobody answered, no lights turned on, no sign of anyone being home at all. Neighbors said they hadn't seen Paul or Linda since Thursday evening when they'd loaded some bags into their SUV in the driveway. By midnight, the Riverside Police Department had officially filed a missing child report for Emma Rose Thornton. Detective Maria Santos, who specialized in crimes against children, was called in from home. She arrived at the Thornton house just after 1 in the morning, finding Margaret crying on the couch while Richard sat beside her in stunned silence. "We're going to find her," Santos said firmly, sitting down across from him with determination in her eyes. "But I need you to tell me everything you know about Paul and Linda Morrison." For the next 3 hours, Margaret and Richard answered every question Santos asked them thoroughly. Where did the Morrisons work? How long had they known them? Had they ever mentioned family in other states? Talked about moving away? Acted strangely recently? Did they have any financial problems or legal issues? The answers painted a picture of a normal couple, quiet but friendly, stable employment, no obvious problems that anyone noticed. But Santos knew that appearances could be deceiving, that predators often looked like the safest people in the room. Dawn broke over Riverside with search teams already organized and deployed across the region. Santos contacted Connecticut State Police, gave them descriptions of the Morrison couple and Emma. She put out an alert to every police department in the tri-state area, uploaded photos to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database. By Sunday morning, the story had spread through Riverside like wildfire burning out of control. Neighbors gathered on the Thorntons' front lawn, bringing food, offering to help search anywhere needed. The local newspaper ran Emma's photo on the front page with the headline, "5-year-old missing after camping trip." Television news stations picked up the story, broadcasting Emma's hazel eyes and shy smile across Connecticut and neighboring states. If you've ever felt that crushing fear when someone you love disappears without explanation, you understand the absolute terror the Thornton family lived through that first weekend. Margaret couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just sat by the phone waiting for it to ring with news. Richard drove around town for hours looking for the green SUV, even though he knew it was pointless. They were long gone by now. Daniel, Christopher, and Benjamin came home to find their little sister gone, confused and frightened about what had happened. "Where's Emma?" Benjamin kept asking, his voice small and scared. "When is she coming back home? I want to show her the fort I built in the backyard." Margaret couldn't answer, could only hold her son close and cry, silent tears streaming down her face. Detective Santos worked without stopping for the first 48 hours, following every possible lead that came through. She contacted the Department of Motor Vehicles for the Morrisons' vehicle registration, discovered the SUV was registered under a different name entirely. She checked their employment records, found that Paul Morrison had given 2 weeks' notice at his accounting firm 3 weeks earlier, citing a job transfer to California. Linda had stopped volunteering at the school library a month before, saying she needed to focus on family matters requiring her attention. Neither had mentioned any of this to the Thorntons or to any other neighbors who knew them well. At the Morrison house, the landlord let police inside with his master key. The place was partially emptied, with furniture and personal items selectively removed. Kitchen cabinets had basic supplies, but closets were mostly empty. It looked like people had been gradually moving out over several weeks, not like a family who just left for a weekend camping trip. In the basement, Santos found boxes of old mail that hadn't been forwarded yet. Bills, advertisements, letters from various organizations. One envelope caught her attention immediately, sent from a P.O. box in Seattle, Washington. The return address had no name, just the box number printed clearly. Santos opened it carefully with gloved hands, found a handwritten letter inside that made her stomach drop. "The house is ready. The room is painted yellow, like you requested. Come whenever you're ready to start your new life." The handwriting was neat, careful, but there was no signature identifying the sender. Santos bagged it as evidence, knowing this was their first real clue about where the Morrisons might have gone. They hadn't gone camping at all, hadn't even planned to. They'd been preparing to leave Connecticut for weeks, systematically covering their tracks, and they'd taken Emma Thornton with them when they disappeared. By the end of the first week, the search for Emma Thornton had expanded to a national level with multiple agencies involved. The FBI joined the investigation, bringing resources and expertise the small Riverside Police Department didn't have. Flyers with Emma's photo went up in truck stops, gas stations, and rest areas along every major highway heading west toward Seattle. News coverage intensified, with Emma's face appearing on national broadcasts and cable news programs. Tips started flooding in from people who thought they'd seen something somewhere helpful. A waitress in Pennsylvania said she remembered a little girl with dark hair eating breakfast with an older couple at a restaurant on Saturday morning, but she couldn't be certain it was Emma from the photo shown. A gas station clerk in Ohio thought he'd seen a green SUV with Connecticut plates, but he hadn't noticed any child in the vehicle at the time. Every lead was investigated thoroughly by the growing task force, but none of them led anywhere concrete or useful. The letter from Seattle became the focus of the investigation when other leads dried up completely. Santos contacted the Seattle Police Department, asked them to investigate the P.O. box address listed. Officers there obtained a warrant, opened the box, found it completely empty inside with nothing remaining. The box had been rented 8 months earlier under a false name, paid in cash for the full year up front. No forwarding address, no contact information, no way to trace who'd been using it during that time. Security footage from the post office had been recycled months ago, no longer available to review for identification. It was another frustrating dead end, but confirmed what Santos already suspected. The Morrisons had been planning this abduction for nearly a year, carefully preparing their escape route, establishing new identities, covering every track they could think of. This wasn't an impulsive decision made on a whim. This was calculated, methodical, and executed with frightening precision. Santos dug deeper into Paul and Linda Morrison's backgrounds, requesting records from previous towns where they'd lived before Riverside. What she discovered made the case even more disturbing than it already was. Paul and Linda Morrison had lived in at least 6 different states over the past 15 years, never staying in one place longer than 3 years maximum before moving again. Their employment history showed a pattern of short-term positions, nothing permanent or stable. Linda had worked as a nanny in 3 different cities, though all the families she'd worked for reported she'd been wonderful with their children, no complaints or concerns whatsoever. But the pattern was clear to Santos now. They moved frequently, integrated into communities, gained trust, then disappeared without much notice or explanation. In one town in Iowa, a missing child report had been filed around the same time the Morrisons had lived there, though they'd used different names then. The case had gone cold within months. The child never found. The family eventually moved away, devastated by their loss. Santos requested that file, compared the details, found troubling similarities to Emma's case. The missing Iowa boy had been 6 years old, taken by neighbors the family trusted who'd offered to take him to a baseball game. The neighbors had disappeared, and the child was never seen again. Santos felt sick reading through the details, realizing this might not be the first time these people had done this terrible thing. She contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, requested their assistance in building a profile of Paul and Linda Morrison as potential serial child abductors. Agent Robert Chun was assigned to the case, a specialist in family abductions and parental kidnapping scenarios. He arrived in Riverside within 2 days, bringing years of experience and a team of analysts to help. Chun reviewed everything Santos had compiled, nodded slowly as he read through the evidence carefully. "This fits a specific pattern we've encountered before," Chun said seriously. "Couples who've lost a child or who are unable to have children, sometimes they try to fill that void by taking someone else's child. They integrate into communities, establish trust, appear completely normal, then vanish with a child who fits what they're looking for." Santos leaned forward, listening intently. "So you think they're keeping her somewhere, raising her as their own?" Chun nodded grimly. "Most likely, yes. If their intention was to harm her, we would have found evidence by now. The fact that there's no body, no ransom demand, no contact at all suggests they wanted a daughter to raise. They chose Emma specifically because she fit their criteria, whatever that might have been." The investigation expanded further, with FBI agents checking adoption records, birth certificates, school enrollments across the entire western United States looking for matches. They searched for any child registered under the names Paul or Linda Morrison or any known variations they'd used in other states previously. They contacted Border Patrol agencies to see if the Morrisons had attempted to leave the country through Canada or Mexico, but there was no record of them crossing anywhere officially. Back in Riverside, the Thornton family tried to adjust to a nightmare they never imagined living through daily. Margaret took a leave of absence from her teaching position, unable to focus on other people's children when her own was missing. Richard kept working, needing the structure and the distraction, but his co-workers said he was different now, quieter, distant, like part of his soul had died. Daniel, Christopher, and Benjamin struggled in school, their grades dropping as they dealt with trauma and fear no children should have to carry. Counselors tried to help, but what could anyone say that would make this better or easier? The first year passed without any significant breaks in the case. The FBI kept the investigation active, following up on periodic tips that came through. Detective Santos never stopped working it, even when other cases demanded her attention and time. She'd drive past the empty Morrison house sometimes, staring at it like it might suddenly reveal its secrets to her. On Emma's 6th birthday, Margaret baked a cake even though Emma wasn't there to eat it or blow out candles. She put 6 candles on top, lit them, and let them burn down while the family sat around the table in heavy silence. "She's out there somewhere," Margaret said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know she is. I can feel inside me. She's alive, and somehow, someday, she's going to come home to us." Richard reached over, squeezed her hand gently, wanting desperately to believe it despite the odds stacking against them. Years turned into a decade, and the case grew colder with each passing season. The Thorntons kept Emma's room exactly as it was the day she left. Her drawings were still pinned to the walls, her clothes still hanging in the small closet. Coco the stuffed bear sat on her bed, waiting for her to come home and hold him again. Margaret would sit in there, sometimes, talking to the empty room like Emma could hear her across whatever distance separated them. She'd tell her about her brothers, how they graduated high school, what they were doing with their lives now. By the time Emma would have been 16, the investigation had slowed to almost nothing active. The FBI checked in annually, asked if any new information had surfaced. Detective Santos had retired by then, but she'd left extensive notes for whoever inherited her cases. The Morrisons had vanished so completely, it was like they'd never existed at all anywhere. No credit card activity, no tax returns filed, no driver's license renewals, nothing in any database or system. They'd either died, which seemed unlikely for both of them, or they'd assumed new identities so thoroughly that even federal agencies couldn't locate them anywhere in the country. The Thornton children grew up carrying Emma's absence with them everywhere they went in life. Daniel became a lawyer, specializing in family law and child advocacy. Christopher joined the Coast Guard, dedicating his life to search and rescue operations. Benjamin went to college for psychology, wanting to help families who'd experienced trauma like theirs. Margaret never stopped believing Emma was alive somewhere. She kept a light burning in Emma's bedroom window every single night without fail. Neighbors called it Emma's beacon, a symbol of hope that refused to be extinguished no matter how much time passed. When Emma would have turned 21, Margaret organized a vigil in the town square. Dozens of people showed up despite the years that had passed, holding candles, sharing memories of the little girl they'd known briefly. The local news covered it, displayed an age progression photo showing what Emma might look like now as a young woman. The image showed a beautiful woman with long dark hair and hazel eyes, mature but still recognizably Emma in the features. Margaret stared at it for hours, trying to see her baby in that adult face looking back at her. "I wonder if she remembers us," Margaret said to Richard that night. "I wonder if she knows she has a family who never stops searching for her." Richard held her close, both of them crying quietly in the darkness of their bedroom. By 2020, 21 years had passed since that October evening when Emma left home. The case file sat in storage at the Riverside Police Department, thick with reports and dead ends accumulated over 2 decades. The Thorntons were older now, Margaret's hair gray, Richard's health declining from years of stress. Daniel was married with 2 daughters of his own, living in Boston. Christopher was stationed in Alaska, still serving. Benjamin worked as a therapist in Hartford, helping trauma survivors find healing. Then in September 2020, something happened across the country that nobody expected would change everything. A woman named Olivia Patterson walked into a passport office in Portland, Oregon to apply for her first passport for a trip she'd been planning for months. She was 26 years old, worked as a web designer for a small tech company, lived a quiet life in an apartment near downtown. She'd been raised by parents she knew as Paul and Linda Patterson, who'd homeschooled her and kept her fairly isolated from other children growing up in their suburban home. They'd told her she was born at home with a midwife present, that they didn't trust hospitals or government bureaucracy, that she didn't need official documents to live a good life. Olivia had accepted this growing up, never questioned it much, because she loved her parents and they'd been kind to her always. But now she needed a passport for a work conference in Vancouver, and she couldn't apply without a birth certificate proving her identity and citizenship. The clerk at the passport office, a man named Marcus Webb, took Olivia's application and typed her information into the system like he did dozens of times daily. But when he searched for Olivia Patterson's birth record, nothing appeared at all. He tried different spellings, different dates, different counties in Oregon. Nothing came up anywhere in the system. "I'm sorry, miss," Marcus said carefully, looking up at Olivia, standing there looking confused. "But I can't find your birth certificate in our database. Do you have a physical copy you can bring in?" Olivia frowned, shook her head slowly. "No, I've never seen it. My parents always handled documentation and paperwork for me." Marcus's training kicked in immediately. Missing birth records, homeschooled upbringing, parents who controlled all documents. These were red flags he'd been taught to watch for in his position. "Can you give me a few minutes?" Marcus asked gently. "I need to consult with my supervisor about how to proceed with your application." Olivia agreed, sitting down in the waiting area, feeling worried now. Marcus walked to the back office, pulled up the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database on his computer, something all passport clerks had access to now by federal requirement. He entered Olivia's approximate age, her physical description, the fact that she had no birth record traceable through any system. The database returned several possible matches from cases spanning decades across the country. One caught Marcus's attention immediately, making his heart race. Emma Rose Thornton, missing from Riverside, Connecticut since October 1999, would be 26 years old now, had dark brown hair and hazel eyes matching Olivia's description exactly. Marcus printed the file, walked back out to Olivia with his supervisor following close behind him. "Miss Patterson," Marcus said softly, sitting down beside her in the waiting area. "I need to ask you some very important questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have your parents ever mentioned anything about you being adopted or coming from another family?" Olivia's face went pale, her hands gripping the armrests of the chair. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why? What did you find about me that I don't know?" Marcus showed her the file carefully, the photo of 5-year-old Emma beside the age progression image. Olivia stared at it, her breath catching her throat, seeing her own face staring back at her from 2 different times in life. The resemblance was undeniable, impossible to dismiss. Olivia sat frozen in the passport office chair, staring at the missing child report that showed her own face from 21 years ago. Her hands trembled as she held the paper, reading the details over and over. Emma Rose Thornton, age 5, disappeared October 1999, Riverside, Connecticut, last seen with family neighbors. "This can't be real," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My parents wouldn't do this." They couldn't have. There has to be some mistake. Marcus Webb sat beside her, his expression compassionate. I understand this is overwhelming, but we need to contact the authorities to verify this information. Within an hour, FBI agents arrived at the passport office. They were professional but kind, recognizing that Olivia's entire world had just shattered completely. Agent Sarah Kim led the conversation, asking Olivia questions about her childhood and upbringing carefully. "Where were you born?" Kim asked, her notebook open. "My parents said I was born at home in rural Oregon," Olivia answered slowly. "They homeschooled me, said public schools were dangerous. We moved a few times when I was young, different towns, always keeping to ourselves mostly." Kim nodded, writing everything down. "Do you remember anything from before you were about 6 or 7 years old?" Olivia closed her eyes, tried to reach back into those early foggy memories. Pieces, just fragments. "I remember snow, lots of it, which is strange because we didn't live anywhere with heavy snow. I remember a bigger house with stairs and other children, voices I can't identify. But my parents said those were just dreams I had, that my memory was playing tricks on me." Kim exchanged a glance with her partner, both recognizing the pattern they'd seen in other cases before. "Olivia, we need to conduct a DNA test to determine if you're Emma Thornton. Would you be willing to do that?" Olivia felt tears streaming down her face. "What if I am?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What if everything I've known my whole life has been a lie?" Kim reached over, placed a gentle hand on Olivia's shoulder. "Then we help you find the truth and reconnect you with your biological family." Olivia agreed to the DNA test, feeling numb as the agent swabbed her cheek. The sample was sent to the FBI lab with a rush order. Meanwhile, agents went to the address Olivia provided for her parents' house in a suburb outside Portland. The house was a modest ranch style at the end of a quiet street. When agents knocked on the door, a woman in her late 60s answered, her face going white when she saw the badges. "Linda Patterson?" Agent Kim asked, showing her credentials. The woman's hand gripped the doorframe, her legs suddenly unsteady. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "We need to speak with you and your husband about your daughter, Olivia," Kim said firmly. Linda's eyes filled with tears instantly, and she stepped back from the door. "He's not here," she said quietly. "Paul died last year from complications with diabetes." Kim and her partner entered the house, sat Linda down at the kitchen table. For the next 4 hours, Linda told them everything, the confession pouring out like she'd been waiting decades to finally speak it. She and Paul had lost their only biological daughter to leukemia when she was 4. The grief had consumed them both, made them desperate to fill the emptiness left behind. They'd moved to Riverside, saw the Thornton family with their 4 beautiful children, and Linda had become fixated on Emma, the youngest, with her shy smile and gentle nature. "We planned it for months," Linda said, crying as she spoke. "We knew the Thorntons trusted us completely. Paul quit his job, I stopped volunteering, we arranged everything carefully. We told them we were taking Emma camping, but we drove straight to Washington State instead. We changed our names, started over completely, raised her as our own." Kim listened without interrupting, taking detailed notes as Linda continued. "We loved her," Linda insisted, her voice desperate. "We gave her everything she needed, kept her safe, homeschooled her so she'd be protected. We never hurt her, never neglected her. We just wanted to be parents again." Kim's expression remained neutral, though anger burned inside her. "You stole a child from her family. You let them suffer for 21 years, not knowing if their daughter was alive or dead. That's not love. That's kidnapping, and you know it." Linda sobbed harder, unable to defend herself against the truth. The DNA results came back within 5 days, confirming what everyone already suspected. Olivia Patterson was indeed Emma Rose Thornton, taken from Riverside, Connecticut in October 1999. The FBI contacted the Thornton family immediately, asking them to come to New York for a meeting without explaining why over the phone. Margaret and Richard drove down with Benjamin, their hearts pounding with hope and fear they'd felt countless times before. When Agent Kim sat them down and told them the news, Margaret collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. "She's alive," she kept repeating, unable to believe the words. "Our Emma is alive after all these years." Kim nodded, smiling gently as she showed them recent photos of Olivia. Margaret stared at the images, seeing her daughter's hazel eyes looking back at her from an adult face. "She has my mother's smile," Margaret whispered, touching the photo with trembling fingers. "She looks just like my mother did at that age." Richard couldn't speak, just held Margaret close as they both cried. Benjamin sat beside them, his own eyes wet, realizing his little sister was coming home after 21 years. The reunion was arranged carefully with therapists and FBI agents present to help everyone navigate the overwhelming emotions. Olivia flew to New York, her feelings a mix of fear, confusion, and curiosity. She'd confronted Linda after the confession, asked her how she could have done this terrible thing. Linda had apologized repeatedly, begging for forgiveness Olivia wasn't ready to give yet. Now Olivia stood outside a conference room, knowing her biological family waited inside. Agent Kim walked with her to the door, squeezed her hand gently. "Take your time," Kim said softly, opening the door. Olivia stepped inside, saw 3 people standing there, staring at her with tears already falling. Margaret moved first, walking toward Olivia slowly like she was afraid she might disappear again. "Emma," she whispered, her voice breaking on the name. Olivia felt something inside her crack open, hearing that name spoken with such love. "I don't remember you," she said honestly, tears streaming down her face. "But I think I remember your voice from somewhere I can't reach." Margaret reached out, touched Olivia's face gently, confirming she was real. "You're here," Margaret said, pulling her into a hug. "You're really here." Richard joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them. Benjamin stood back briefly, but Olivia reached out a hand toward him. "You're my brother?" she asked, and Benjamin nodded, stepping forward to join the embrace. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, no words needed yet. Over the next several months, Olivia learned about the family she'd been taken from. She met Daniel and Christopher via video calls, both overjoyed to see her again. She looked at photo albums showing her as a baby, a toddler, the life she'd lived before it was stolen. She learned about the search that had consumed Riverside, the years of waiting and hoping. The light Margaret had kept burning in her window every single night without fail ever. "I never stopped believing," Margaret said one evening as they looked at old photos together. "Everyone told me to accept that you were gone, but I couldn't. I knew you were out there somewhere." Olivia squeezed her mother's hand, still adjusting to calling her that. "I'm glad you didn't give up." The legal situation with Linda Patterson was straightforward. She was arrested and charged with kidnapping and child abduction across state lines. Because of her age and health problems, and because Paul was deceased, the prosecution offered a plea deal. Linda was sentenced to 8 years in prison, though she'd likely serve less with good behavior. For Olivia, the question of forgiveness remained complicated. She loved the woman who raised her, even knowing now what Linda had done. But she also felt anger and betrayal for the lies that shaped her life. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive her completely," Olivia admitted to her therapist. "But I also don't want to carry this anger forever. I need to find a way to live with both truths somehow." Olivia decided to keep the name Olivia in her daily life, but legally reclaimed Emma Rose as part of her full identity. She was both people now, the child taken and the woman raised. Margaret supported her daughter's decision completely. "You're my Emma," Margaret said, hugging her close. "But you're also Olivia, and I love both parts of you." On a warm evening in June 2021, almost 2 years after the discovery, the Thornton family gathered at their home in Riverside for a reunion dinner. Olivia had flown in from Portland, where she still lived and worked. Daniel and Christopher came with their families, their children meeting Aunt Emma for the first time. The table was full, laughter echoing through the house in ways it hadn't in 21 years. Margaret looked around at her children, all together finally, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. "I want to show you something," she said to Olivia, standing up from the table. She led her daughter upstairs to the bedroom that had been kept untouched. Olivia stepped inside, saw the drawings still on the walls, the small dresses in the closet, Coco the bear on the bed. "This was your room," Margaret said softly, picking up the bear. Olivia held it close, feeling something stir inside her. "I remember this," she whispered, surprised by the certainty she felt. "I remember carrying this bear everywhere." Margaret smiled through tears, knowing some memories never truly disappear. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Olivia sat on the front porch with Margaret beside her. "Thank you for never giving up on me," Olivia said quietly. Margaret took her daughter's hand, held it tight. A mother never stops looking for a child. No matter how many years pass, the love doesn't die and the hope doesn't fade. If this story reminded you that missing doesn't mean gone forever, that families can be reunited even after decades of separation, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that miracles can still happen. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from right now, because somewhere out there, another family is still searching for answers, still keeping their light burning through the darkness. And our community support helps keep their hope alive until the moment when science or chance or fate brings their missing loved ones back home where they belong forever. Thank you for being here with us, for caring about these stories that remind us all that time may pass, but real love endures. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep your light burning bright.